Hello, everyone. Welcome to Drawing Attention. I'm Georgi Urrutia, and I'm the ALIA Graphic convener. We're absolutely thrilled to have three amazing guests who will be speaking from different perspectives of their experiences with comics and censorship. We will also have some time at the end for a bit of a panel talk and Q&A. Now, if you have any burning questions, please submit them, and we'll keep track of them. And please know that this event is being recorded. As a national group based across the land we call Australia, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I personally would like to specifically acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land where I live, where I play, where I write, where I draw, and where I work, actually. And I pay respect to the elders past and present of all First Nations people across the land, and thank them for the rich storytelling, tradition, and art. And in fact, you can see some comics there, some graphic novels by Australian Indigenous creators. When the World Was Soft was actually the most recent publication, just a couple of months ago. And there are more and more coming, so we're lucky like that. Now, today what we need to talk about, though, is that comics are actually being challenged. And they have been a target for a very long time. This is not new. The comic scare of the 1950s affected many countries, the US, UK, Canada, Australia as well. And in fact, in some ways, Australia was ahead. The Horwitz Code, for example, was actually implemented before the Comics Code was implemented in the US. Just by a few months, but it was done before. And the Queensland Literature Board was very active, but it wasn't just Queensland. As I've done just a little bit of research. This is some research that I'm doing. I hope to publish an article or maybe a series of articles. These are all articles from the early 1950s in Australia. So they were clearly being challenged back then. And unfortunately, they're being challenged now as well. So if we look at the publications that were classified by the Australian Classification Board in the last 5 years, we can see that between 2019 and 2021, there was only one comic. It was actually a manga that was submitted by the publisher. But if we look at the last 2 years, the comics are clearly overrepresented. So in 2022, it was 5 out of 6 publications were comics. And in 2023, 12 out of 15 that were classified by the classification board. The good news of that, the flip side, is that this year so far, there are 8 publications that have been submitted to the classification board, and none of them is a comic, graphic novel, or manga. Now, if we look also at what has been challenged at the library level in 2023, and ALIA is keeping track of, we can see that 12% of the books challenged in libraries last year were comics. And as we know, 12% of our collections are not comics. So comics are clearly overrepresented in that data. Obviously, the absolute majority of books being challenged are LGBT+, but then comics are clearly overrepresented. And also picture books, illustrated books, anything that actually has a visual aspect to it. So that's an interesting thing. And obviously, one of our core values in libraries is freedom to read, and it's something that we must defend. And that's what we want to talk about here today. So enough from me. Our first guest is Briar Rolfe, who's working on their first graphic novel, Get Your Story Straight, to be published hopefully next year, I've been told, through Hachette Australia, and who can talk to us about some of the issues they faced and had to consider in the making of their graphic novel. So, Briar, the floor is yours.
Hello. Give me a second while I share my little screen. We've already been slightly introduced. I'm Briar. I use he, they pronouns. I turned 30 this year, and I'm a cartoonist and graphic designer. And I am working on a book. I just held out my hand like I was presenting at a screen. So get your story straight. For the nerds, 288 pages, two color, comes out through Hachette. The release date is a little bit ambiguous at the moment, just because it turns out comics takes time. And I'm going to be publishing it through Hachette Australia. And we've also got an American contract now with Levine Corrido, who are a little but very powerful indie publisher in the US. So that was a big score for me. I'm just following Sean Tan all over the place because he also works with Hachette and apparently with Levine Corrido. So the book I'm working on, if the title and the cover have not given you a clue, is a little bit tricky. For eagle eyes, maybe we can just kind of computer enhance and zoom in on the real challenge presented by my story. It is a queer and trans romance. And it's a graphic novel, so it's right in the pocket of the most challengeable books. It's also young adult, it's older young adult. My characters are like university age. So Henry, my main character in the middle there, is 19. And so we're not even in high school. So maybe romance means a little bit more than coyly looking at each other across the classroom. So my caveats before I talk about the kind of the debut artist side of things is that I am not a contract law expert. And everything in this kind of area changes very rapidly, and not everyone is going to work the same way. Follow up, I am a cartoonist. So I am about to talk very much the nerdy specs of some of my contracts in terms of the preemptive work that we do to try not to get our books banned. And yeah, let's get into it. So I've signed 2 contracts. Hachette, my first love, when I entered into that great competition called the Book Chillerette, where you do all your pitching. They have changed Australian contracts kind of around 2020-ish. So a lot of contracts now have this clause, which I have been calling the don't get cancelled clause, which is that your publisher can choose not to publish your work because of their concern about the public perception of the author. For example, the publisher's view of disparaging social media statements. So you can understand why that might be a little bit of a worry for a trans graphic novel worker on what am I saying? Cartoonist, artist. So not ideal. This second bit is the reason that having an agent turns out to be very, very important. You'll see I've highlighted there, the publisher will not be entitled to recover advances paid. That was different in the boilerplate. The original version of this contract would have had me pay my advance back with less than 30 days notice. Which obviously maybe some big dog celebrity chefs might actually be able to foot up that bill, but I definitely can't. And so this is all of the contract I'm going to show you today is the good version. So this is the good version. Hachette are very much in my corner, and I think understand what they're getting into, but it's always nice to know that, I don't know, if Hachette Australia got taken over by someone who was not my biggest fan in the next couple of months, they could not then demand the amount of my advance that I've already been paid back. So just like, you know, the general existential threat of it all. The summary of this is my agent, Danielle Binks of the Jacinta de Mace literary agency, has saved my ass so many times, and we're about to get to look at a different time that has also happened with my American contract. So this was the tricky part of my American contract, because as we all know, the situation is a little bit more volatile, let's say, with book banning in the US. And even though this like clause also appears in a slightly different version in my Australian contract, my agent was like, ooh, hold up. It's a book about trans characters, and my protagonist is binding his chest for a lot of the book. And in some definitions of what counts as harm, any kind of transition can count as harm. And so essentially, if my publisher were to decide that a challenge that I'd received, like if I was getting sued in America, if my publisher decided not to back me, they could say, well, you did sneak in that clause, which is a formula or instruction that causes harm or injury to the reader by including binding. So actually, we don't need to support you in court. So I suggested an addition. So again, a big overhead sign saying I am not a contract law expert. I sent this as a suggestion, and everyone involved just said, yeah, sign off on it. Actually, just pop that wording in to the contract. So we've added an additional clause that is acknowledged by my publisher and by me, that representations of LGBTQIA plus identities, especially representations of gender affirmation, are not constituted as formulas or instructions which may cause harm or injury to the reader under this warranty. So if I do include a bunch of instructions about how to like launch a skateboard off the roof of your house to do mad sick jumps, then like that might actually make me liable to get sued. But it means that if someone goes, you've been doing evil by representing, you know, two girls kissing, then I'm gonna have Levine Carito's support on that one if it comes to that. So that's sort of my summary, is that we've got agents very, very good, and that when things come down to a definition of harm, the big question is what is harm and who defines it when it comes to your contracts. And so just even though I have not met anyone who's a real bastard in publishing yet, everyone's been very lovely. My you know, the team that I'm working with at Hachette and at Levine Carito are champions and very supportive of my work, but it is good to keep an eye on your back, I think, when it comes to stuff like this, especially when you're managing a tricky book like mine. So you can see some pictures of the scandal. This is one of my test pages, so it will look a little different from this. But it's about the marriage equality debate. I should add, it is a rom-com set in the marriage equality debate. So there's some, it is good, there is happy. And I've also included some of my inks that I'm currently working on that just represent some of the scandal, the rainbow flags and the pride that will get challenged, I think it's fair to say. It's good to be working on a book that comes just with a big challenged in advance label, and a little pride parade, which my friend has called in advance the Briar gets cancelled page. So yeah, it's a privilege and a joy to get to work on it. It will be the first graphic novel that Hachette Australia releases. So I think we're all hoping it goes quite well. But it is there's a little bit of a scary atmosphere for me. And I would say I do lie awake at night sometimes going like, will my book be banned in Texas before it's even come out? Like, yeah, but anyway, all that to say, when my book comes out in 2025 or 6, please buy it, because we'll probably need that support. Yeah, there we go. I think that's me.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was great. And it was a great insight to get into something that we don't really see usually, the other side of it, and what you have to deal with. And when your book comes out, it will join others like A Stars in Their Eyes or Stonefruit by Lila, really great graphic novels that have been published, and at least in my library, they haven't been challenged. And to my knowledge, they haven't been challenged in Australia yet.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Next, we're going to hear from Ellery Harris, who is a cartoonist currently working in the making of a book, Drawn from the Margins, The Power of Graphic Journalism. She's also an editor with a lot of experience, who has worked with a lot of different cartoonists. So the floor is yours, Larry.
I wanted to begin. Can everyone see my screen? Is it okay? Is it looking all right? So this image popped up on my socials, and I really wanted to kick off by sharing this. So for those of you who don't know, Genderqueer is, the most banned comic book, I think. Is it the most banned graphic novel in the world, maybe? This is a shot from the upcoming season of Heartstopper. Also an incredibly banned book about queer teens. Maya Kobabe, the author of Genderqueer, posted this up, and it just makes my heart sing. So I just wanted to kick off by sharing this image because it's really beautiful, and it's also like this lovely merging of two quite extremely controversial stories in comics. I should introduce myself a little bit. My name is Larry. I worked at the Nib for a really long time, which is a political cartoon website and print publisher that operated for a decade. We wrapped up publishing in August last year, but during that time we put out a bunch of anthologies and a ton of magazines, some of these it was a US-based publisher, so I lived in the United States, worked there, and that's where most of these things came out. So I wanted to share with you some of the books and print publications that we've put out. So this one on the screen here, Greetings from the Wasteland, was political cartoons from the previous Trump era. So there's obviously not going to be one from this upcoming Trump era yet, but there's still time. This book included political cartoons from a huge spectrum of people, and included a lot of queer perspectives, because you might remember that a lot of trans banned stuff started to come in during the Trump era. But this book was not banned. The next book that I want to show you here is this. This is the Nib magazine that we worked on. We had 16 issues of this magazine. I think there was a gay story or a queer story in like every single issue of this magazine, and that was also not banned. It was carried on book stands in Barnes and Noble and Indigo Books in Canada, which are two of the largest booksellers in the US. We spread lots of queer stories that way. Didn't have anyone try and challenge it. This is the first Nib anthology that we put out. This is the first book that we put out, Eat More Comics, The Best of the Nib. And I counted, and there are 7 extremely queer stories in this book. This book has also been sold. I think it was available at one point in almost every comic book store in Australia. And even though it was only a Kickstarted book, we had distribution through Diamond, but it was the whole printing process for that was that it was self-published. That was not banned, or there was no pickup. There were no complaints about this book. And this is the Nib team, or like some of us anyway. And you might notice that we're a bit gay. This is a very gay team of people, and very lovely humans to have worked with. And so, of course, when we had to come up with a new idea for an anthology in 2019, we came up with this one, which is big, Be Gay, Do Comics, which is an entirely queer anthology. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the book that got banned. This was banned in 4 different states in the US, and made its rounds in the complaints. I understand that there are like certain groups that would share lists of books to be made complaints about at public libraries in the US, and this book was on that list of, it was in the top 10, which is pretty cool. I'd say that's an accomplishment there. And this book was, I think it was really beautiful. The cover art was by Maddie G. He was like an excellent artist I've worked with a lot. And it's an anthology of truth. All this, the work that the Nib does, it is not fiction. It's all non-fiction. We're talking about people's experiences. A lot of it is memoir and that sort of thing, and history. And that's what Be Gay Do Comics is. So Be Gay Do Comics actually started out as a Kickstarted publication, like everything else that we did was put out initially through Kickstarter. So we would have, pre-sales available through a Kickstarter funding campaign. And then after the Kickstarter had ended for Be Gay Do Comics, IDW Publishing, I think they contacted us and asked if they could put it out as well. So there were actually 2 print editions of Be Gay Do Comics, and I can't give you updated numbers on how many versions of that was sold because I'm actually just not sure, but it was, this is probably the biggest publication that we've made. There were more issues of this printed than any other thing that the Nib has done. So in many ways, it makes sense that that would be the piece that got the most attention. But yeah, so it was interesting as well when this happened because this book came out in 2020, and we were meant to have the launch for this book actually at Cake, which is a comics festival in Chicago that's actually held in a gay convention center place. Like it's like I can't even remember what it's called, but it's actually like a public space that is designed for Chicago's queer community to use, like a community space. So that's where Cake is held, and that was where the launch for this book was supposed to be before the pandemic started. So obviously that launch never happened. So in many ways, it's quite interesting that the book became so popular and did quite well, given that, it came out during pandemic times when a lot of books actually flopped because there wasn't, distribution and people weren't able to publicize that they'd been a part of this in the same way that they might have previously. But I don't think that it impacted the sales. The book banning really just gave further attention to this publication. And in some ways, I think it made many people in the queer community more aware of its existence, which resulted in more sales. So yeah, book bans are really interesting things. I feel obviously I would rather that the book was available in more public libraries, but the fact that we were able to do, I think there was one additional printing after the banning started. So that, to give you an idea of the impact that might have. Yeah, and that's all I really have. So I'll stop sharing now, and we can move on. Stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Hilary. And okay, up next we have Ryan Estrada, who has done lots of really interesting work, often working with his wife, like in Banned Book Club, which we had in our book club a while back. Occulted, and also the upcoming No Rules Tonight, which is coming out in October. He has also been a strong supporter of libraries in the US during the current wave of challenges and bans, which I say current, I mean, it's been already going for about 3 years, more or less. The floor is yours, Ryan.
All right, so I'm analog. I don't have slides. So if whoever has the ability can just click a pin on my name or something so that I can get the screen. But that happening. Okay, so anyway, yeah, as mentioned, I am Ryan Estrada. I am an artist, author, and adventurer is what I call myself. I've been doing that, traveling around the world ever since I became a traveler from going to Australia as a student ambassador, which is what inspired my student ambassador series. So I made a whole book inspired by my travels to Australia. And the thing people most know me for is probably Banned Book Club. We have a follow-up called Occulted, as you mentioned, No Rules Tonight. So Banned Book Club came about because back in like 2017, I was walking up a mountain with my wife, and she casually mentioned that something reminded her of back when she was hunted down by the police for reading books a dictator didn't like. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, I've known you for like 15 years. We've been married for several. How did I not know about this? She's like, it's no big deal. We just read books and stuff. And so I tweeted about that experience, and our publisher was so shocked at the idea that a democracy like South Korea had had state-banned books just 30 years earlier. They couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So we started working on this book. And of course, by the time that book came out, not only were there state-banned books in America, but Banned Book Club became one of them. And in the process of writing this book, before we knew this all was going to happen, I was traveling around Korea interviewing all these activists who had gone to prison, who had been arrested and tortured and beaten for reading banned books. And also in the process, my friend Amy Rose, I found out she grew up in a UFO death cult and was banned from reading books that were not published by the cult. And it was by reading those books that she was able to escape. And so suddenly I like an issue that I had never really thought about, because growing up, it was always like, if you someone bans a book, you're just going to sell more of them. Who cares? Like it was something I never really thought about beyond that. But then hearing all these people who had risked so much, risked being thrown in prison, taken from their families, I realized it was something I had to look into. And especially when our book started being banned, I decided I'm going to become pen pals with everyone who bans my book. So I started emailing them, and I emailed them a lot longer than I should have, because I realized that especially several of them, if I email them a question, they will write a 10-page response. And I'm like, that's several hours they don't have to ban books. So I learned a lot about these people. First of all, the first thing I learned was I asked this guy, hey, I saw you ban my book. I'm just wondering if there's any misunderstanding. You know, you said it was pornographic. It's literally about nerds who like to read books. What are the issues with the book? He's like, I haven't read it. And that's what I got out of every one of the people that I talked to. And then beyond just talking to them, I started flying. I live in South Korea, and I started flying back to every place my book was banned to speak. First time I was going to speak in Florida, and the local librarians actually said, we've been planning this for a few weeks, but we changed our mind. Please don't come. We're scared of this guy. We don't know what could happen. So I still flew to Florida, but I ended up speaking in a different city, and I worked with Florida Freedom to Read project, and we gathered a group of politicians and board members, faith leaders, community leaders, and reporters, and I talked to them to try and convince them why it was such an important thing to care about, so that locals would speak up and it wouldn't be the drama of some guy flying in from Korea. I did a similar thing when our book was banned in Kentucky, and that was a really interesting experience, because that was scary, because I wasn't with a hand-picked group of people that Florida Freedom Read wanted to hear it. I was standing up in front of city council with a lot of very sour faces and people who didn't know who I was. And they were also doing measures on like the police and fire department. So like full of cops, and I'm like, they are not going to be happy that I'm here. Nobody knew I was coming. And I just get up and be like, hi, I came from Korea to talk about how books are great and you should support your librarians. And faces were like they were stone faced. And I kind of awkwardly said what I had to say, sit down. They finished the meeting. And then every single person in the room, every cop, every firefighter, every board member came up to me and was like, hey, man, I just want to thank you for coming out. I'm actually on your side. I don't really talk about it publicly because like around here, you can't talk like that. Nobody agrees. And I'm like, 436 people just said the same thing to me. You should all talk. Maybe you realize that the only people who want these books banned are 4 people who came in from Ohio and work for a for-profit organization that does this. Like this is not from your community. And I was able to get a lot of people to kind of realize that, because what I've been learning doing all of this stuff is that there was a statistic in America, I'm not sure what it is this year, but I think last year 60% of all book bans in America were done by 11 people. And there are people who are funded by large political PACs who come into not even their community, a community that they're in charge of with their group, and they hand in a paper with 200 book titles per month. And that's where that thing has changed, where people used to say, more people will you get more attention. But with the number of books being banned these days, even the people who wrote those books don't know, because there's so many books. The only reason I know a lot of the places my book has been banned because I'm very nosy and I Google myself way too much. And I became friends with all these freedom to read organizations, and they tell me when things happen. But I've had friends that, like, I talk about book bans, like, oh, I never had that. And I'm like, your book has been banned in 6 different states. And you're like, wait, a what? So there are a lot of books that are just disappearing from shelves that authors don't know why they're getting less sales, and teens and young people who need these books don't know that they're being represented. So a lot of the things that I've learned from it is comparing what's going on now to what's going on in history is, number one, there's always a magic word. In Hyun Sook's day, when I was researching Banned Book Club, I learned that the people in charge of the book bans just called every book communist. It was bad, it's communist. But that wasn't true. They were actually also banning books about democracy because they didn't want people to realize what democracy was and be like, oh, wait, we don't have this. In the same period in the 80s in America, it was satanic. All these books are satanic, even though it's, you know, none of them have anything to do with religion or Satanism. They're satanic. And in this latest, you said it's been going on about 3 or 4 years. It started out, they were calling all the books woke, but that wasn't scary enough. It didn't get the attention that they wanted. So they switched to porn. Now they say all these books are porn. And that's some of the arguments I had with the people I became pen pals with. And I'm like, hey, one of the books that was banned alongside mine is called Zen Shorts. It's a children's book about cartoon bears illustrating stories about friendliness. And your challenge said that its story of radical empathy is incompatible with Christianity. Explain to me how that's pornographic. And that's the case with a lot of these. They have exactly 2 screenshots that they use from graphic novels. That's one of the reasons that comics are so often challenged, is because it's very easy to take a panel out of context and be like, look how scary this is. Whereas a novel, they have to like read this whole page and get the context for what it's saying, and you'll see it's really saucy. So they have exactly 2 screenshots that they like to share from excellent books for older teens providing sex education, and they'll straight up lie and say this porn is in the children's section. Another funny story is that while I was in Kentucky, I learned that I was talking about how they had banned the children's book Are You My Mother, because they confused it with the Alison Bechdel adult graphic novel Are You My Mother and didn't know the difference. And then after that, one of the politicians came up to me and said, well, maybe that was wrong, but I support them because I heard that the Let's Talk About It, the sex education book, was put in the children's section. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. It's like, well, there's no way to know. I'm like, we're in front of the library. Let's walk in and ask. So I walked in and asked, and I found out that Let's Talk About It was not in the children's section. What was there was Let's Talk About It, Elmo's Guide to Conflict Resolution, the Sesame Street book. So they're banning books without reading them. And the final thing that I've learned is that it never ends with book banning. Book banning is always the start. As I mentioned, all those fake words. What those magic words really mean is books about the types of people we wish were not in society. And the end goal is always, with Banned Book Club, it was a government takeover with a dictator. In Occulted, it was a cult leader who wouldn't let her followers do anything the cult didn't say. It's always about trying to take over and make your way of life what's right. And history repeating itself that, I was shocked that people went to jail for reading banned books in Korea. And now in America, several states have laws that a librarian can be charged with a felony for stocking a book that one person complained about. In The Cult, there was a scary situation where Amy was taken from her family for reading banned books. And now in Florida, they're trying to pass laws that children can be taken away from their families if they support them in being trans. And just this week, I looked at Project 2025, which describes itself as the next American revolution, wants to take over the government. And there's the page of all of their supporters and partners, and almost every group that banned my book is on that list. So they're actively going from banning books to trying to take over. So that's why this is important to me and why I never stop talking about it. And I've done like 2-hour versions of this talk, but I know everyone has a lot of room, so I'll leave it there and try not to go into too much of a rant, but it's something that's very important to me.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Really interesting insights there. And obviously, what's happening in the US, it's, it's not here, it's not in our libraries, but it should be of concern because it was in the US where this current wave of challenges started. And we actually, in 2022, in September 2022, we actually had a podcast episode with members of the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable from the American Library Association, and they were talking about comic book bans and challenges in the US, and how they had formed a committee looking at them, which was called Addressing Comic Book Bans and Challenges Committee. And that was September 2022, and we were saying, what happens there, hopefully not, but may arrive here. And it was only a few months later that we started hearing of challenges here. So this is why we're having these conversations. If you want to hear that episode, actually, it's episode 59 on our podcast feed. It's still there on our podcast feed, so you can definitely hear it. And we talked to the whole committee, and these are librarians who are actually dealing firsthand experiences with these kind of things. And it was awesome what you mentioned about that confusion, that they hadn't read the books, and that confusion, because that same confusion has happened here in Australia. So there was a library where The Boys was challenged, and they thought that they were challenging the comic book series The Boys by Garth Ennis, which now is a very successful TV series as well. But actually what they were challenging was actually a children's book, totally different book. So that has happened in Australia as well. So they very often copy each other. Anyway, enough from me. Who was keeping track of the questions? I don't know if it was James or Jade, if there's any question.
We do have, oh, sorry, Gabby, you go.
Yes, it was me. So we have a question from Phoebe, and she would love to hear your thoughts on how publishers are thinking about book challenges and bans. Not so much the litigious side or sales, but more the impact on intellectual freedom.
I mean, I work with a lot of different comic publishers in Australia and overseas, and I feel like book bans like this, while I totally agree with everything that Ryan has said, I think that the publicity that surrounds, banned books is important to publishers. Not important, but it's significant. Like, if something is banned, it does not necessarily mean that the book is going to do badly. So there's not that kind of, it is a capitalist system, publishing. We're not all doing this for the merit of art in the end. But I do think when you're talking about the intellectual, was it the intellectual? You saying the intellectual property, the
intellectual freedom side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that?
Just, I guess, the ethical right to have access to different ideas, different kinds of ways of thinking, different stories, and I guess that there's like the book banning side, but then there's, especially in libraries and school libraries and things, books not necessarily being taken off the shelf, and there's a big sign saying, this is being banned, but very kind of quiet censorship, soft censorship, as people call it, where books might be located in different areas so that people won't see them. They won't be put in displays. They won't be so prominent, so that the library doesn't have to deal with the difficulties of customers coming in or writing in or calling in. And so I guess, that I was just wondering, because I can see it from a library point of view, but I was wondering more from a publisher point of view, if that's ever on their minds.
Well,
In the conversations I've been with publishers on adult comic books, and I'll speak here. You've seen the cover of Briar's cover design there, and I did work with Briar on that book in the initial stages as well. I think that a really big focus has been made on making a book very obviously for adults and making that very clear what a market might be. So one really good example of this is in Australia, there was a choice made for the publication of Sarah Firth's book, Eventually Everything Connects, that she would be nude on the cover and surrounded by paraphernalia that was very clearly adult content, to make it clear this is a book for grown-ups. It's not a book for children. And that would mean that there would be no confusion about where it should be shelved or who it is being marketed towards. But then when that book was published in the US by Graphic Mundi made the decision to take the nude Sarah off the cover, because that might end up limit where it would be sold in bookstores, because they don't want to have, I feel like in America, it's a bit more puritanical when it comes to nudity. And there was an understanding that it might just not end up in bookstores if there's a nude person on the front cover of it. So it still has a condom wrapper and actually a tiny nude Sarah riding a snail, but the American version has a closed version of her on the cover instead of a nude version, and the nude version is inside the book. So it still has the same quite graphic content in parts, but there's decisions around how the book is what it looks like and who it's trying to make it very obvious where it's being marketed. I think that would probably be my response. So I haven't seen any publishers that I've worked with being concerned about limiting people's voices and trying to, squash down ideas in that way, but trying to figure out how to get this book out in a way where it won't be facing challenges in the way that we've seen them happening in recent years.
I think
I was
sorry.
wondering how it was going to change. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was wondering how it was going to change because Banned Book Club was written before all this started happening, and it was also a very small indie publisher. And Iron Circus's reaction has been go on Twitter and be like, "Try it, suckers! Ban my books. I'll make weirder ones." But the sequel, No Rules Tonight, that's coming out from Penguin Books, and we started working on it after all this happened. So I was wondering if there was going to be some sort of reaction, but they've actually been very supportive. No Rules Tonight actually has a queer romance with a trans character. We have a cover blurb from Maya Kobabe on it. So they've actually been really supportive, and I haven't I get emails from them about their plans to fight back. So I haven't had any issues, but there have been a lot of stories in America, specifically with Scholastic. There was a situation where they announced that their school book fairs, schools would have to opt in to a special collection that had all the gay books in it. There was also a situation where they wanted to republish a book for schools, but exclude the essay at the end because it mentioned U.S. imperialism, and they wanted that taken out. And so there's been a lot of uproar about those two situations. It was a couple of years ago, so I don't know what's happened since then. I haven't heard stories like that, but I think maybe some publishers kind of at the start started to be like, should we listen to these people a little bit? And there was such an uproar that I think maybe they were like, okay, let's back off from that. It's hard to know what happens behind the scenes. We only know what we hear from our own books and what the news stories break, but it seems like every publisher is kind of taking it differently and kind of feeling their way in what they should do about it.
Yeah. Briar, do you want to add something to it?
I was going to say, I think that the impact, especially because comics take a long time to make, and the Australian industry is still in a fairly beginner stage. There's a few publishers who have got graphic novel experience, but not everyone. And so I think if we're going to see an impact from this sort of thing, it will be over time, because creators, we all know in Australia, cannot survive off book income. And a huge amount of creator income is from library borrowing, and school talks and kind of events like that. And so Will Kostakis, the young adult author, has done quite a lot of conversations about how he's being asked to not talk about the gay bits of his YA gay romance when he goes to school talks, or just not, like, slowly watching those requests to come do school talks taper off. And so we're also like, you never know why a book doesn't get, like, you'll never hear about a book that doesn't get sold, right? Like, and so the question of, like, if publishers are going to become slightly more conservative because they really need that book, like that library market. Like, one of the big conversations, I didn't sign with HarperCollins initially, when we talked to Harper about my book, but a big reason we thought about signing with Harper was they came with a huge, very compelling case for how they would get the book into schools, how they would get it as assigned reading, how they would get it into school libraries. And so if we were looking at that, if I had signed with HarperCollins, then now we would be looking down the barrel of probably the plan for how this book will be successful is not going to work. Because if a single parent goes, this book is too gay, which they've got plenty of indication that that is a thing that they're allowed to do, societally, like, then, you know, my book doesn't sell. And so I think that that's like even if the publishers are, or individual editors at publishers are willing to take a risk on certain content in books, I think we might be turning a corner into a place where creators start to go, I need to self-censor, because I know Will has talked about this, like, I need to self-censor my next book because if I don't make money from author talks, I can't afford to make books. Or if I don't get that, like, little check from my library borrowing, I can't afford to make books. And for me, like, it was a absolute, just like a huge freak accident that a queer trans graphic novel for young adults, like, all of those quite conventionally hard to publish two categories in Australia, like, a book that hits all of those notes got the sort of publisher attention that it did. But for my next book, I am petrified. I am scared to my pants. Because the other thing is, like, we don't, like, yes, there's the, you know, the fact that you won't get sales, you won't meet your readers that you're meant to meet. You know, when people choose not to stock your book, or they choose to, you know, not to shelve your book, or the library just decides not to buy that one because they really don't want to have the problems. Like, it's just like, we're also not talking about the amount of, you know, face-to-face abuse, or the amount of, like, horrific hate messages or things like that that authors then get subjected to. So there's a level of, like, how much of that are you willing to front up to? Like, are you willing to take a cut to an already small livelihood? Are you ready to, like, you know that all of the sweet little queer kiddies in rural areas who your book was technically written for will never be able to find it at their library? And if there's not a local Dimmicks, how are they going to get it? Like, there's, you know, and how many of them have the money to buy a graphic novel in this economy, you know? And so, like, I think from the, like, my publisher, I was astonished. No one has told me to take out the lesbian polycule. When we were pitching it, my agent was like, that's probably going to be the hard thing to pitch, is, like, that there's lesbians, but also that they're not monogamous lesbians. It's never come up. It's not even one of my early editor feedbacks was make the book sexier, like, which was delightful. And so, like, the publisher itself, like, everyone there has been very supportive and very much like, push it harder, go further, make it more the book it should be. But, you know, that this book, I started pitching in 2020, I sold it in 2021. The market is looking increasingly different in 2024, and who knows, after my current book comes out in 2025, who knows what the market will look like in 2026. Like, and so I think that is the thing that definitely keeps me awake at night, especially, you know, as the young, you know, trans debut author. It's just the question of, like, where is my place in this
Yeah.
industry? And then like, a lot of books do get publicity when they get banned, but only the big books. There's a comic I'll try to find, a really good journalist talking about like how a lot of the books that get attention for being banned are like, oh my God, they're banning the mouse graphic novel. How could anyone do this? Like, everyone knows that book. The reason it's scandalous is because everyone knows that book. But if your book is on a list of 200 books that get banned that month and no one knows it, like if you're a debut and you don't get to do the event because you can't talk about queer shit, and then like there's a snowball effect, I think.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt? I actually have like I don't know, I feel like this is really important. This idea about like what supports a book author and how we operate. You were talking about how this, an author, Briar, is like, well, if I can't do the school tours, then that's actually a huge amount of my income. And I think that's a valuable thing to think about. But there's also like the value of media interactions around books are so pivotal. And I have a lot of friends who are now making decisions around where they tour for their books based on whether they are allowed to speak or not. Because in Florida, you are not allowed to speak in public if you are in drag. So if you're a man in a woman's dress or whatever, but that can be interpreted in so many different ways. And it means that many queer and non-binary and trans authors are just making a decision not to go to those places because it's too, like, they could get arrested, like that's an issue. So when you're talking about the snowballing effects on, on authors, like, and how that impacts people's income and livelihood, but also who accesses their books, like that's so important. So anyway, I just wanted to.
Yeah. And I think that's the kind of thing that's also happening at libraries, so obviously there are books that are being challenged and we're keeping track of those, and please report them to ALIA as it happens so that we build a picture of what's happening. There are the books that are classified as well, and that's the highest level. But then there is also the issue of soft censorship in libraries, and it's one that we really need to think about as librarians as well, and be aware of it. And I know that some people have, because I've heard through the grapevine, because we talk and we know people, and I know that some people have said things like, adult graphic novels, the trouble, maybe we shouldn't be buying so many, or, maybe we shouldn't buy that one because someone may challenge it. And I think we need to remember that our core value of freedom to read, and, really defend that and say, well, the book may not be for you, but it definitely has an audience, and it's an important one for others. It's great that, for example, Hachette Australia is taking a chance, and their first graphic novel is yours. I'm really happy about that, and we have seen some great examples in Australia before, and sometimes, like Stone Fruit, for example, from Lila, that was published by Fantagraphics in the US, but Stars in Their Eyes was published here, and then it was published in the US by I think it was Scholastic, I believe. So so it's great to hear different stories like that.
So just so you know, Phoebe has put the link and the email address to send stuff to in the chat too, so anyone can check that out. Thank you, Phoebe.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's all good. There's that first link is the Freedom to Read page, and that is a set of resources which is behind the membership. You have to be logged in to get there as an ALIA member, and that's so that basically we don't get detractors kind of reading our rule book and seeing what we're suggesting to libraries to combat book challenges. So if you're not a member, that's totally cool. Just send an email to education@alia.org.au, and we can collate that data and give you any support you might need.
And if you're not a member, hopefully your institution that you work at is an institutional member, and should, in theory, have a representative of your institution on that committee. So find out who that is at your workplace and work with them to do what you can. But on that, I've got a very quick question for all three, hopefully quick as well. What are libraries doing well in this space, do you think, as creators, and what would you like to see libraries do more of to support challenged books, challenged authors, all of this sort of stuff?
Let's start with Brian.
Honestly, not
Right.
sure. Don't have a book out yet. I think that there is a level of backing down to the drag story time that does not impress me, despite physical threats of violence. Because I'm like, well, that's part of being trans in public, is we deal with physical threats of violence. Like, if you want to put your hands up to do something queer and you go, oh, violence, then like you've failed step one of allyship. If you're not willing to take a punch for it, you know, it doesn't count, which is a complicated thing because OH&S. And so I understand why, like, you know, libraries have pulled events, but like a lot of events around here have been like, oh, we can't do drag story times because, you know, who knows who will rock up. And then that just means just sort of sending a blanket message that this is a library that would prefer that staff don't have to deal with anything nasty, than queer people feel safe. So yeah, look, that is a very complicated issue, but I think the drag story time has been very linked to book banning. Like, ideologically, it's all about what children are exposed to, right? So
Yeah.
I think just a little bit more of a thought about that from libraries, or the way that that gets handled, just so it's not just like a blanket, we've got to stop doing it now because it's not safe. Because what people really just internalize then is events where there are trans people are not safe for children. They don't go because of the Nazis, they go because of the trans people. So it kind of lines up with the values we would rather people did not take away.
Yeah, good point. Ellery, you have.
Oh, I totally back what Briar is saying here for sure. But I also would add that I work in adult graphic novels by and large, and I don't think that there are a lot of people publishing adult graphic novels in Australia, and I think that there could be more done to publicise that these are books by Australian authors within public libraries. Like, I use my public library regularly, and I'm one of those obnoxious people who takes the Australian graphic novels off the shelf and puts them on the little stand, swapping them out for other things. I think that that's actually a way of demonstrating support. And when we talk about Australian authors, there are a lot of authors that are, you know, producing work that, you know, is queer and potentially controversial to readers in Australia, but I feel like is excellent content. I mean, Sam Wallman's book, Our Members Be Unlimited, the recent union book. I mean, Sam is an out and proud gay man, and it does not shy back from that. And these books are in his public life. And I would love to see more, you know, more support through libraries for works like that. And I know that it's not, you know, like putting something on a display shelf or like just, you know, that actually does mean a lot to authors. And anyway, that's something I feel like I would love to see more of. Generally,
yeah, I'm that obnoxious person at my library as well. I put the Australian graphic novels on display, and take every opportunity to say, you know, this one she's actually from Melbourne. She's actually a local creator. You should read it. Ryan?
Well, my experience with libraries comes from, you know, traveling to across America, and doing talks at libraries, library conferences. And in my anecdotal experience, every librarian I've talked to is like willing to put their life down, especially to be an librarian in America right now. You have to be in it because you care, because they're just dealing with death threats and insults all day. And so they all care so deeply about making sure kids get books that they need. And then there's the people right above them, the management, that say no to everything. One of the stories that I've heard is near where I grew up in Michigan, there's this county that's like one of the bluest leaning places in America, but the boss, there's one person in town who complains and the boss just listens to her. And a few years ago, the boss asked my librarian friend to put together a banned books week display, and he said, "Oh, but don't put any gay books on it, because that'll cause trouble." And it's like, well, who is this banned books week display about? Us? Is it against us? Because he's like, put 1984 on it. That was banned 40 years ago. So there's a lot of the upper levels of people that are not librarians but work in libraries that don't care, and they're making things very difficult for the people who care about books more than anything else in the world. So that's been my experience, that we need that hopefully some of the love from the people lower on the totem pole can reach the people at the top in America.
Yeah, yeah, great insights. Look, I'm aware that it's 3:04, so we've gone over the hour. If anyone needs to go, please go, because you may need to go or on the floor. But if you want to stay a little bit longer and you have some questions, we're happy to answer them. So just any questions, final chance. And Gabby or James or Jade, same thing. If you have any questions, feel free to speak up as well.
I probably need to go, but I just want to say, on the back of what everyone's just been saying and what Ryan was saying about librarians that love books, if you want to join ALIA Graphic, you feel free to give a shout out of where we can do that, because we love people that are passionate about graphic novels and comics. I'll put a link in the chat.
And that goes for if you are interested in joining the committee, if you're interested in being involved. But we understand people have different time constraints. If you don't know what you can manage, but you still want to get involved, please get in contact. We'd love to hear from you, work out what we can manage. And even if it's just like being part of the book club on our website, talking about graphic novels and their place in libraries and all of that each month. If it's however you want to get in touch and whatever involvement you can manage, please we want to hear from you.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Yes. If this is Bing, and I'm attending this webinar from the National Library of Australia. So just wanted to jump in. I don't have any question, but just wanted to say, we, as a National Library, we wanted to collect Australian publishing scapers, at our best, and we aim to collect comprehensively. Yes, and there's one thing about legal deposits. So if you publish a book, no matter whether that's published by a commercial publisher or indie published, please do give us a copy of your book. We would love to have them, and we would take care of your items. And if you want your books to be available in the future, please do deposit with us. And even if your books are published overseas, let us know, get in touch, and we probably, most likely, if you are Australian author, we'll probably purchase a book and put them in our collections.
Yeah, legal deposit, it's important.
Same goes to the state libraries too.
That's right. Yeah.
Just a question on that. Is it the publisher that should be responsible for depositing
That's right.
the legal deposit? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So
Rather
it's
than
the
the author.
publisher's responsibility. But we do find that sometimes it's quite patchy. So if your book is published, do check on our catalog to see whether we have a copy of your book or not. If not, probably just contact your publisher to remind them to give us a copy. And if it is self-published, and if you are an author, and you are responsible for giving us a copy.
I think
And
that
if you need
NLA
help,
has my zines, at least a few of my zines. So
I had a quick look at our catalog and realized we have like 6 of your zines,
I
Brian.
was generous
In
in
our
zine fan.
yes, and Larry as well. We have 5 of your items in our collections already, and we love to have more.
There you go, Ryan. You've got to send some zines.
That's awesome. And yeah, of course. And at ALIA Graphic Novels and Comics, we're always happy to celebrate, promote Australian comics and graphic novels. And please talk to us. Let us know when you're publishing something, because we do keep track of what's being published, but at the same time, it's easy to sometimes forget, or, you know, because we're all volunteers and we have our jobs and lives and all that as well. So, you know, an email is always welcome. Let us know. And also, we're always happy to talk when I create a chat or a webinar like this or anything like this. So talk to us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Larry and Ryan, for your time. And we'll leave it here.